and he is a Pope of science. And I kind of want to emphasize that. And I want to let you into a very important decision that Pope Gregory XIII decided that he made during his pontificate in the 16th century that still affects you today. Okay, up to this day, every day, probably multiple times every day. Now, there was an important cartographer and astronomer, Ignazio Danti, who was a Dominican friar, and he was under the reign of Gregory XIII in charge of all of the sundials in Rome. Now, Rome still at that point had 6 functioning sundials. Now, sundials, as you know, work with the shadow of the sun, right? And then you can tell the time by the shadow of the sun, which obviously presupposes that the sun rises and is in the right constellation, all of that for the sundials to work. Now, Ignazio Danti was a gifted cartographer and astronomer, and so he made many calculations about the sundials because the time was a little bit off, and that led him to actually study the calendar. At that point in Rome and in the world, they used the calendar of Julius Caesar, the so-called Julian Calendar. Now, Ignazio Danti had his, studies, had his calculations, had his dates, had his calendar studies on the one hand. And then on the other hand, at night, he looked up in the sky and he was looking for the constellations. And people back then didn't have TV, right? So they had nothing to do at night than to look at the stars. So that's what he did. And so he figured out and he said, okay, guys, we have a problem. We have a problem. And so he went to the Pope. He asked for an audience with the Pope. And Pope Gregory XIII granted the audience. He was a lover of all of this knowledge and scientific research. So he invited him in. And now we can see the maybe the detail of the next picture. And so he invited him in. And so we have the moment of that audience where Ignazio Danti, with other friars and scientists, present the studies to the Pope. And what were these studies about? They were about the calendar. And Ignazio Danti said, Your Holiness, we are behind the stars in our calendar. Our calendar does not correspond to the stars anymore. And the Pope said, okay, well, so, and he says, well, basically we have 11 days. We're 11 days behind since the time of Julius Caesar. So in about 1.5 millennium, 11 days have accumulated of being behind the stars. And so Gregory XIII, as a Pope of the Renaissance would say, said that's not a problem at all. So in 1582, you went to bed on October 4th, and you woke up on October 15th. 11 days later, 11 days cut from history. It was still, so the Pope still back then had the power to change time, mind you. So you woke up on October 15th, 11 days were made up for, and now the calculations could fit again to the movement of the stars. That whole thing turned into a new calendar. And that new calendar is called the Gregorian Calendar, and is in fact the calendar that you have on your desk or on your wall or in your agenda or in your cell phone. All right, so that's still the calendar that we have. The Orthodox Church, mind you, and Bob will know this much better than I do, still work on the Julian calendar. So that's why also many of the feasts are moved, right? They're 1 week behind.